Hobbits would play great roles in the events of the late Third Age of Middle-earth, from a quest against a dragon, to defeating the Lord of the Nazgul, to the very destruction of the One Ring. But where did this race of short beings come from? And how did they come to settle in the land we know as the Shire? Today on Nerd of the Rings, we cover the history of hobbits. If you're familiar with Middle-earth at all, you'll know the basics of the hobbits. They're short, usually around 3'6", have slightly pointed ears, and furry feet with leathery soles. What you may not know is that the earliest hobbits were divided into 3 groups, each with their own unique characteristics. One is known as the Stoors, the only group of hobbits said to have grown facial hair. They enjoyed water and would often go swimming and use boats. They are also said to have worn boots. The second group, known as the Fallohides, were taller and slimmer than the other 2 groups, some growing up to 4 feet or more in height. For reference, they would be only slightly shorter than Merry and Pippin after they drink the Ent Draft, which caused them to be the tallest hobbits in history, somewhere over 4'5". The Fallohides were said to be fair in both their skin and hair, and they never grew beards. The final group is the Harfoots, who would have many of the traits and practices that we would come to see as typical for hobbits. They were shorter and smaller than the other groups, had no beards, were browner of skin, and went barefoot. They enjoyed highlands and hillsides and began the practice of living in hobbit holes, also known as smiles. They tended to find comfort in settling in one place for longer periods of time, and were known to be friendly with the dwarves who traveled through the High Pass. While they are often referred to as a separate race, hobbits are generally believed to be related to men, and thus were descended from the second children of Iluvatar. Sometime in the Elder Days, that is before the end of the First Age, it is believed the halflings branched out from the race of men. Their exact origin is unknown, and hobbits don't even appear in the histories of the elves. In fact, they remain unknown to any of the other races of Middle-earth until at least the early Third Age. At this point, the hobbits live in the Vales of Anduin, between Greenwood and the Misty Mountains. The Harfoots are believed to live in the lower foothills of the Misty Mountains, north of the Gladden River. The Fallohides dwelt under the southern eaves of the Great Forest, and the Stoors in the southern Vales of Anduin. It is in this time where they are known to the Northmen, the ancestors of the Rohirrim. During The Lord of the Rings, we learn that the Rohirrim have ancient legends of the hobbits, and share many words that sound alike and have similar meanings. Theoden would refer to Merry as Hobbitla, meaning hole builder, very similar to their proper name, Hobbit. As time goes by in the early Third Age, the Hobbit clans grow uneasy. For around 1000 of the Third Age, Sauron takes over Amon Lunk, which becomes Dol Guldur. This growing evil leads the forest to be called Mirkwood, and causes Easterlings to move into Rhovanion and attack the Northmen near the Vales of Anduin. And this is where we have the first known historical event of the hobbits, which they refer to as the Wandering Days. Alarmed at the rise of Dol Guldur and the influx of his servants, the hobbits begin to travel westward. The Harfoots are the first to leave their homes, coming to Eriador, where they are first recorded in Arnorian records around 1050. These hobbits are called Perianath, or halflings, by the Dunedain of Arnor. Around 100 years after the departure of their kin, the Fallohides followed into Eriador. By the year 1300, the Fallohides come to join the Harfoots, who take some among the Fallohides as their leaders, since they were a bolder breed of hobbit. It is also by this time that the hobbits had settled as far west as Bree, which would remain the westernmost settlement of the hobbits for quite some time. During this time, the Stoors would follow in the migration after the Fallohides, in 1150 of the Third Age. Rather than taking the northern route, the Stoors take the Red Horn Pass, the Pass of Caradhras, that the Fellowship would attempt to travel nearly 2,000 years later. As the Stoors follow a southern route along the Bruinen, some break away and move into the Angle of Eriador, south of Rivendell, while most of the Stoors move to Dunland, specifically Swanfleet, a marshy area that most resembled their former home. Here, the Stoors would come into contact with the Dunlendings, causing their speech to become slightly different than their Hobbit kin further to the west. In 1356, Angmar begins its war against the men and elves of Eriador, with Rivendell itself coming under attack in 1409. Sometime during this 53-year period, the Stoors of the Angle flee due to the threat of war. While some would join their southern kin, others would return to Rhovanion, to their former home in the Vales of Anduin. It is from these Stoor hobbits that we would get Smeagol. I go into more detail about these particular hobbits in my Gollum video. In 1601, two Fallohide brothers, Marco and Blanco, lead a group of hobbits further westward from their homes near Bree. Crossing what would later be known as the Brandywine Bridge, they settle in an empty land within Arthedain, one of the last remnants of the Kingdom of Arnor. The King of Arthedain, Argaleb II, grants the hobbits permission to settle in what was once a great region of farms, vineyards, and woods in Arnor, and also the hunting grounds of its king. The hobbits begin the process of colonizing this fertile land that would come to be known as the Shire. Roughly 30 years later, the Stoors of Dunland move north, joining the other hobbits in colonizing the Shire. The Stoors are specifically said to settle in the East Farthing and South Farthing. While all the hobbits would intermingle and merge over the years and become a single group, there would be glimpses of some of their old differences from the Harfoots, Fallohides, and Stoors. For instance, due to their time in Dunland, some hobbits in the South Farthing and Buckland would have some Stoorish characteristics and words. Those of Fallohide descent were long found to be leaders among the hobbits. Certain families were known to have particularly strong Fallohidish lines, such as the Tooks, Bolgers, and Brandybucks, maintaining their bold and adventurous nature and being great leaders among hobbit folk. Of the Harfoots, as noted earlier, we know that they were the most numerous to colonize the Shire, and their ways would live on in the traditions and practices of their people, among which are going barefoot, of course, and living in holes in the ground. While only coming into the stories of men and elves in the Third Age, relatively late in the history of Middle-earth, there would be many great triumphs and tragedies among the hobbits. In 1636, the Great Plague, which affects much of Middle-earth, claims the lives of many. In 2747, goblins from Mount Grom invade the Shire, but are driven out by Bullroarer Took in the Battle of Green Fields. In 2758, Gandalf the Grey would come to the aid of the Shire folk during the Great Winter. It is then that he would learn of their hardiness, as they would fight to outlast the following famine known as the Days of Dearth. 150 years later, a second terrible winter would follow, the Fell Winter, when white wolves entered into the Shire and Gandalf and the Rangers of the North once again aided their allies to stave off hunger. Through it all, the hobbits of the Shire, while not the mightiest of beings, would prove among the most hardy. The descendants of these great folk would go on to play pivotal roles in the reclamation of Erebor and, of course, the War of the Ring, being among the bravest, greatest, and oldest of hobbits ever to live. Now for a fun audience question. Who is your favorite hobbit of all time? Let me know who and why in the comments. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil19, Jim Limber Davis, Jay Breakfield, Sky Carcass, Zetrock, Grand Strategy Nerd, The Dark Haired One, Salim Rahman, Slidebelts, Wyland, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description and purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.